Hey everyone, how you doing tonight? Good to see you. As always, we are going to have a great late night chat. So I'm glad that you're here, and yeah, let's do it. Let's do what we always do.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just is a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. I am so glad to be here with you tonight. We're going to have yet another one of our late night conversations. And it's interesting. Sometimes I come on here with a big plan and I do things completely differently. Other nights I come on here with not much to talk about, but I talk about it. And other times I come on here and this goes exactly as I expect. The magic between me and you and the people in the chat and you and me and all that, it goes a lot of places, right? What we do here is very, very special, and it goes in different directions. So I'm glad to be here with all of you tonight. And, we're going to do our thing. The way it works is the opening remarks are the first thing that I say. That's me talking about whatever it is that I'm going to talk to you all about tonight. Then from there, we do a roll call where I call you out as I see you, names and locations. That would be important. That's important. It's always great. And then the remainder of the show is me answering your super chat questions for the remainder of the night. I answer your questions for the rest of the night. So if there's something that you would like me to talk about in the second half of our program, that would be awesome. That would be tremendous. That would make my night. If you can give me something to talk about in the second half of the program, send a super chat here on YouTube, send a Rumble rant on Rumble. If you're on Facebook, I can't see your comments on Facebook, but you can certainly send me a super chat. You can certainly send me a Rumble rant. Now, a couple announcements. If you didn't realize it, I am not just a social media personality. I am also... Oh, goodness gracious. It's doing that thing where it won't show you images. Well, I'm also with the Center for Political Innovation, CPI. That is the organization that I have decided to lead, to create. And we've got a lot of great people in the group. We have regular meetups. And our organization, the Center for Political Innovation, CPI USA, the .org, the Center for Political Innovation. We at this point, we do a lot. We have a morning message every morning on the CPI YouTube channel. And, we have one this morning, one lined up for tomorrow morning. So the morning messages are a great way to stay in touch with the community, to start your day with revolutionary hope and optimism. We are committed to trying to get people together to make a morning message every single morning. That's what we're committed to doing. And so because of that, because of the morning messages and all of that, you can go to the CPI YouTube channel and hear the morning messages every morning. Let me just link you the CPI YouTube channel, and you can submit morning messages as well. That's a great way to plug in with other people from the community. I don't know why StreamYard is screwing up and not showing images on the screen, but that's okay. We won't die. I won't show you the morning message image, but I will send you. This is the link for the YouTube channel. Where we have the morning messages. That's where we have them every morning, and they're awesome. So go and go and subscribe to the CPI YouTube channel and go and tune in every morning for the morning messages. And it's great. Different people have been sending them in, and men, women, old, young, different ages. It's really, really great to see who's in our organization and the great work that they do. If you feel inspired to make a morning message, this is where you can do it. The other thing I wanted to remind you all of is that coming up on the coming up. Oh, why is that there? Don't know why that's there. Coming up, I'm just trying to get a slide together since it's been weird. Coming up on October 12th, we are having a workshop that will be taking place in the state of Illinois, in the Chicagoland area. We are having a workshop, and it is called Working Families First. Build the Economy, Not the Empire. And Peter Coffin will be speaking at the workshop, along with myself. There will be catered food. There will be musicians. I really hope that you can join us because it's going to be a great day in Chicago. We're going to start early in the morning with discussion and music and coffee and donuts and classes, and from there we're going to have some great afternoon activities, and then it's going to get even more exciting as the day goes on. You're going to get to meet other people that are part of the Center for Political Innovation community. It's going to be really, really tremendous, and I'm really, really looking forward to this workshop. Right? CPI is growing. We've got a new way of doing things, a new organizational style that we are developing, and this is all very, very exciting. So if you would like to attend the workshop, all you need to do is register. And if you register, we can follow up with you and get you all the information about where to go, etc. And it's going to be really, really great. I am really, really pumped and excited for the upcoming workshop. And there's a QR code on the screen for those who would like to attend. And I'll drop the link in the chat as well. But yes, we have a good number of people who've registered so far. It's only been out. The mass email went out earlier today. But if you're planning to come, even if you're a CPI member, make sure you register, right? So we know how much food to order. We know who to prepare for. We know the whole 9 yards, right? Please go ahead and register so that we know that you plan to attend. The link is down below in the description. It's also here, and I'll drop it in the chat on the Rumble as well. But yes, we're having a great workshop October 12th. We would really like you to be there. So if you could register for the workshop, that way we know that you are coming. So see you in Chicago, October 12th. Working families first, build the economy, not the empire. So now we will move on to the bulk of the program. We will move on to me giving my opening remarks, and then the roll call, and then me answering your questions for the remainder of our show. So if you got something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, boom, send me a super chat. That's the way it works. First opening remarks, then the roll call, and then answering questions for the rest of the night. So folks, I don't know if you're aware, but this is the big week at the United Nations. The United Nations General Assembly, the climax of the General Assembly is the end of September, the last week of September at the United Nations is the big week when all the world leaders attend. And Joe Biden is attending, as is Modi, the president of India. And there was a leak today from the meeting between Joe Biden, who I guess is at least nominally still the president of the United States. He doesn't seem to have much power, but he is, in name at least, the president of the United States. And he had a meeting with the president of India. And it appears that he was trying to push the president of India against China. And this is what Joe Biden was caught on a hot mic saying to Modi against China.
We believe Xi Jinping is looking to focus on domestic economic challenges and minimize the turbulence in China diplomatic relationships, and he's also looking to buy himself some diplomatic space, in my view, to aggressively pursue China's interest. China continues to behave aggressively, testing us all across the region, and it's true in the South China Sea, the East China Sea, South Asia, and the Taiwan Straits. It's true across the scope of our relationship, including on economic and technology issues.
Now, I am suspicious of this for a number of reasons, because it sounds to me like Joe Biden was reading a script. They said he was caught on a hot mic, but that doesn't sound like an unscripted, off-the-cuff comment, like he's telling us how he really feels when he thinks no one's listening. That sounds like he was reading a statement to the president of India. That's what it sounds like to me. And then that makes me wonder if that statement was intentionally leaked. They didn't allow cameras behind closed doors to see Modi's meeting with Biden, but they wanted it to get out that the USA is courting India as an ally against China, and they wanted in particular way too fluid to not be scripted. That maybe that they just wanted it to get out there that the United States is courting India as an ally against China. Now, let's also, while we're here, though, let's talk about the inaccuracy of some of what was said in the statement, especially towards the end of the second half. Right? I mean, some of the stuff here, let's just take this apart.
China continues to behave aggressively.
How is China being aggressive? I mean, let's just talk about that first one. How is China being aggressive? I cannot think of one country since 1978 that China has invaded. Right? The Kampuchea War of 1978, China invaded Vietnam. They did so in response to Vietnam intervening against the Kampuchea Pol Pot government of Cambodia. That was 1978. That is the last time I've ever heard of China invading anyone. China has one overseas military base in the African nation of Djibouti on the Horn of Africa. The United States has 800 and probably over 1,000 military bases. Russia only has 8 overseas military bases. So China, with its one overseas military base, with its with no invasions of any country since 1978, China is behaving aggressively. I'm not following how China is aggressive. Just not following it. I mean, where has China been aggressive? I'm not following this one bit. But we continue.
See this all across the region, and it's true in the South China Sea.
The South China Sea. So China is being aggressive by having a military presence and challenging the United States' military presence in the South China Sea. I mean, that would be like saying that China calling the United States aggressive for challenging the presence of Chinese ships in the Gulf of Mexico. Of course, China is going to have ships in the South China Sea, and the fact that Chinese ships would be in the South China Sea would crowd out American ships. I mean, that's not aggression in any conceivable way. China having a military presence in the South China Sea makes perfect sense.
East China Sea, South Asia, and the Taiwan Straits.
Now, the Taiwan Straits, Taiwan has been part of China from the beginning. And in fact, the legal name, it is still called the Republic of China. It is part of China. However, the United States has worked to divide it from the mainland. After the Chinese Revolution of 1949, the U.S.-backed dictator Chiang Kai-shek, who lost and after Mao and the Chinese Communist Party were successful, Chiang Kai-shek set up shop on the island of Taiwan, and he declared that that island of Taiwan was the real government of the entire Chinese mainland. And for a long time, the UN seat of China was held by the island of Taiwan. And for a long time, there were, the government on Taiwan, the local population, the people who actually lived there, were outvoted because every province and every region of China had a member of the parliament or whatever. And the people who actually lived there had very little say in the politics because all of China was voting on all the policies. The USA gave loads of weapons to the government on Taiwan to threaten the government on the mainland. And the government on Taiwan meddled in American politics. You can read about the China lobby. That was what the McCarthyists, they were called, the big, extreme anti-communists in U.S. politics, the supporters of Joe McCarthy. Some of their biggest allies were what they called the China lobby, which were people based on the island of Taiwan who hated the Chinese government and hated communism and blamed the Democrat Party for China, the mainland of China becoming communist. And the rallying cry of the Republican Party during the McCarthy period was who lost China? And the China lobby of kind of wealthy Chinese business owners and others financed and funded Joe McCarthy and the more extreme wing of the Republican Party during those years. Now, what happened? Well, Henry Kissinger had the idea that because the Soviet Union and China had their falling out, that the USA could use China as an ally against the Soviet Union. And we know Richard Nixon went to China in the early 70s. Then after that, the USA withdrew recognition from the island of Taiwan. And then in 1979, Jimmy Carter formally established diplomatic relations between the USA and China. And the USA has a one China policy, meaning that the United States recognizes that the island of Taiwan is part of China and that there is one Chinese government and its capital is in Beijing. So official U.S. policy is that the Taiwan Straits, the government on Taiwan is not legitimate. It has no diplomatic relations with the United States, and that the government on Beijing has total control and a rightful claim over the island of Taiwan. That is U.S. government policy. It is the one China policy, which is still intact according to U.S. law. I mean, it has not been changed. The USA has not changed its one China policy. Yet the United States did fund the protest movement in Hong Kong that sought to prevent the Chinese central government and the Chinese mainland from being able to enforce its laws and extradite people from Hong Kong. The USA has funded Tibet separatism and groups that are trying to break Tibet away from China. The United States has funded the Uyghur movement and the Islamic and pan-Turkist separatist elements in the Uyghur regions of China. The USA, even though it doesn't recognize Taiwan as being a separate country, and it does recognize one China with a headquarters and capital in Beijing, the USA continues to give weapons to Taiwan and provide Taiwan with all kinds of weaponry. And we saw that Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, before she left office as Speaker of the House, she even visited the island of Taiwan to make a political statement. So we see the United States increasingly messing with China, right? The Chinese government considers Taiwan to be part of China, and the United States is supposed to recognize that. The USA agreed to recognize that. But we see the United States putting a bunch of weapons onto the island of Taiwan, giving a bunch of weapons to a government they don't even recognize. We see the Speaker of the House visiting the island of Taiwan without a passport from Beijing. I mean, at this point, there's many attempts at this. And this is U.S. aggression. It's not Chinese aggression, right? I mean, Taiwan is under U.S. law considered to be a province of China, of the People's Republic of China. So it's U.S. aggression for the USA to go there and recognize and provide weapons to a government that is a breakaway. Is trying to break away what the United States legally considers to be China. Now, why is all of this so important? And this is a point that it requires a little bit of deeper understanding. And we're going to talk about this. The reason that the Taiwan issue is so important to the Chinese government and to Chinese people in general is because the way China was kept poor during the century of humiliation, the way the British Empire was able to oppress China, was by dividing it. Right? The Dalai Lama had his little kingdom in Tibet. The island of Taiwan was conquered by Japan. Hong Kong was a British protectorate, and local regional warlords had their power and didn't recognize the central government. And China was kept poor because it was divided. In 1927, the great American writer Edgar Snow was living in China, and he witnessed a famine in which millions of people starved to death in 1927. And why did they starve to death? Because the fields that were supposed to be growing food were growing opium poppies. And because there was no central government that could organize relief. And so if they had food in one area and starving people in another area, there was no central government to organize to get the food to the area where the people had it. There was no strong central government. The British Empire kept China divided, and that is how China was kept poor. Regional warlords, the Dalai Lama, and the Japanese controlling Taiwan, and all of this, Hong Kong being a British protectorate, all of this was how China was kept poor. But the Chinese Communist Party has overseen the greatest transformation of a country that human history has ever witnessed. Since 1949, China has gone from being the sick man of Asia, in which people were starving to death regularly, in which families sold their daughters into prostitution so that they would avoid starving to death. And Shanghai was the center of child prostitution, as millions of Chinese peasants would sell their daughters into prostitution so they wouldn't starve to death. And millions of people became opium addicts and were worked to death from opium addiction by British corporations and British banks. HSBC Bank was set up to dominate the Chinese economy. That was China before the Communist Party came to power. But since the Chinese Communist Party has been in power, China has become a rich and powerful country. 800 million people have been lifted from poverty. They have the world's biggest hydroelectrical power plant. They have the world's biggest telecommunications manufacturer. Half the steel on earth is made by the state-run Chinese steel industry. They are building roads all over the countryside. They have wiped out illiteracy. They've wiped out extreme poverty. They have the fastest trains in the world, high-speed railway, and they're building them not just in China, but all over the world. What the Chinese Communist Party has overseen is one of the greatest achievements of human development and progress that humanity has ever witnessed. That was the Chinese Communist Party. They did this. And they did it by creating one China. And this points to some deeper analysis. Because when we think of empires, right, that's something that those of us that are anti-imperialists, that are those of us that have a left-wing sentiment, or those of us who are just patriotic Americans, right? The American government, the American Constitution came out of the struggle against the British Empire. We generally don't like things that are referred to as empires. They're bad, right? We're for people having their self-determination. We're not for nations exploiting other nations, etc. And so we tend to just think of empires in general as being bad. However, there is deeper analysis coming out of Eurasia. Russia and China, there's a new school of thinking that's rising in popularity. They call geopolitics. And geopolitical analysis talks about the empires of the sea versus the empires of the land, the thalassocracies of Rome and Greece and the British Empire, and the turgocracies of the Tsarist Russia, Tsarist Russian Empire, of the Chinese dynasties, and that there is a different nature to the empires of the land versus the empires of the sea. The empires of the sea were very much about dominating trade routes and scraping off as the middleman in all trade transactions and sending all of the wealth of the world to concentrate in one powerful city, building up a powerful military that can threaten and dominate the world and dominate and control trade routes at the point of a spear, at the point of a gun, at the point of a cannon, at the point of a drone or a cruise missile, dominate the global economy and scrape off a little bit and send it to mighty cities like New York, like Rome, like Wall Street, like London, and build up these mighty cities while controlling trade routes and kind of keeping the world in poverty and making sure that no force of opposition can emerge. Now, that is the Atlanticist or thalassocratic model of empire. However, if you look at the czars, right, Alexander the Great, Ivan the Terrible, Catherine the Great, the czars that ruled on land, that had land-based empires in the history of Russia, were very different. And the dynasties that ruled in China were very different, because the empires of the land, the turgocracies, the way they functioned was that they held together huge swaths of land and connected it. In order to have any development, they had to build roads. In order to connect these different territories of land, they had to build roads, and they had to carry out development on the land, and they had to hold different ethnic, tribal, and religious groups together. And that a different kind of culture emerges from empires of the land, a different kind of civilization, and a different model of trade emerges from empires of the land. And that the Chinese dynasties and the Tsarist Russian Empire were very different in the way the different regions interacted with the capital. That in many examples you see the authority, the leadership of the Chinese empire developing the various regions of China and building them up and building roads so they have more access, and giving education and creating programs and bringing civilization and such. And you see that in the history of the Russian Empire as well. The czars, Ivan the Terrible was very authoritarian, and there was obviously a lot of political repression, but there was an effort to build up the various regions, to hold the different ethnic groups together. And that empires of the land and empires of the sea have a different character. Empires of the sea tend to oppose development because development could become a force of opposition, and they tend to just want to control the trade routes and extract tribute and build up a mighty city. Whereas empires of the land seek to expand civilization beyond the control of a mighty city, and in order to maintain control, they have to expand development and make sure the regions are more connected with roads and such, and they have to engage in development to hold the empire together. And so empires of the land tend to believe in historical progress. In fact, historical progress is what makes an empire of the land and gives an empire of the land the ability to exist. If they're not engaging in historical progress, if they don't build those roads, if they don't provide education, if they don't bring ethnic groups and rival tribes together, the empire comes apart. Whereas with the empire of the sea, as long as they've got their control over the trade routes, they can beat people down and they can impoverish people, and they want to hold back development. An empire of the sea opposes historical progress and opposes development. An empire of the land must engage in historical progress and must carry out historical and industrial development in order to maintain its legitimacy and maintain its control. And so both of these empires that we've seen over the past thousands of years. Both these types of empires, they're both empires. They're both exploitive. They both exist in the context of slavery, in the context of feudalism, but there is a distinct character to them that is different. They differ from each other in their relationship with the conquered lands. And that then leads us to why there is a very strong difference between Russia and China and the so-called West, right? We understand that the West became capitalist first, the rise of capitalism, that capitalism in the West expanded into imperialism, which was capitalism in its monopolistic stage, the domination of the world by big banks and corporations. But that imperialism that Lenin described in his book, that economic system where bankers, trusts, cartels, and syndicates dominate the global economy, that system of imperialism has a very Atlanticist or thalassocratic character to it. It's holding back development. It's controlling the trade routes. It's dominated by financiers. Meanwhile, the way that Russia and China were able to become modern industrial countries was with a communist revolution. They adopted a Western ideology, Marxism, an ideology invented by a German guy who lived most of his life in London because he had to flee London and Paris. But they took a Western ideology called Marxism and they adjusted it and they adopted it. First, you had the rise of Marxism-Leninism in Russia, and you had the rise of Stalin. Eventually, you had Mao Zedong thought and the Chinese Communist Party. And with Soviet Marxism-Leninism, with Mao Zedong thought in China, Russia and China both asserted their independence and took control of their economies and started to build. And it was the Soviet Union that restored what was once the Russian Empire. If you look at the way the Soviet Union was the lands that were once part of the Russian Empire united into the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and a huge amount of development was carried out. And what's even more interesting is that the vote to keep the Soviet Union, at the time the Soviet Union was falling, was much higher in the smaller republics than it was in Russia, because the smaller republics depended on the Soviet Union for electrification, for development and such, and that the Soviet Union spent a lot of money building up the more impoverished regions, kind of following that model, right? Because that was, these impoverished regions depended on the Soviet Union, and in order to have stability, they had to develop, etc. And the Chinese Communist Party, after the century of humiliation, they reunited all the territories that were considered once part of the Chinese Empire. And they also built them up. And you should see the huge development projects that they've carried out in Tibet. And the way that they fought the Islamic insurgency in the Uyghur regions, the way they fought it was with jobs. I wrote an article, Jobs Not Drones, about how the Chinese Communist Party has fought against terrorism in the Uyghur regions with economic development, providing economic opportunities so people don't join terrorist groups and drug gangs. And the rise of communism in the 20th century and the anti-imperialist governments that have emerged in Russia and China, the geopolitical analysis of what they are is starting to become more clear. In the 20th century, we analyzed things purely in terms of capitalism versus communism. That was the way the discourse was framed. The Soviet Union and its allies were communists, and the United States was capitalist and was the leader of the free world. But as the Cold War came to an end, communism was very divided. The Chinese eventually aligned with the United States against the Soviet Union. The various communist groups divided. The Western communist parties cut off their tie to the Soviet Union. And so communism got very, very confused, and you ultimately had the fall of the Soviet Union. And if you look at it, nowadays, we see the rise of what is very clearly an anti-imperialist bloc in the world. There's a very powerful anti-imperialist bloc that has just emerged, that is emerging. Russia, China, Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, these countries have emerged, but their socialism is of an interesting character, right? People talk about how Stalin, very much applied socialism in a way that was designed for the peoples of the Soviet Union, that it had a cultural and economic character that was very much designed to raise the Soviet Union up with its 5-year economic plans, etc. And if you look at what Mao did, there was a distinctly Chinese character to what Mao was doing. Mao used the peasantry as the main class to carry out the revolution, not the industrial proletariat. They had the new democratic revolution at the beginning, then led, and then you had the Cultural Revolution, and then you had the rise of Deng Xiaoping and the huge market sector, socialism with Chinese characteristics, and that there was a uniquely national flavor to socialism in Russia and China that was a rejection of Western Marxism. It was a rejection of the Western interpretation of Marxism, and that Trotsky turned against the Soviet Union, and Trotskyism became an ideology that flourished in the Western countries. And in fact, the neoconservatives, the main anti-Russian, anti-China, pro-war faction in the United States, traces its roots back to Trotskyism and Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution, and that Trotskyites, are the most anti-China, the most anti-Russia voices. Western leftism has deteriorated into a main battering ram used against Russia and China. The LGBT obsession, the human rights NGOs of George Soros, all of that, the fake left is the main vehicle through which the West attacks Russia and China, and they do it with Western leftism, Trotskyism, the Frankfurt School, all of that stuff. Whereas socialism and communism and anti-imperialism in the oppressed countries of the world, centered around Russia and China, has taken on a kind of conservative and nationalist character. Right now in Russia, people are defending their country, waving the flag of the Soviet Union and the hammer and sickle, but also waving icons of Jesus and icons of the czarist empire, and that the song "God Save the Tsar" and the Soviet national anthem are played next to each other. In China, there is a huge revival of Confucius and an admiration for Confucian thought. At the same time, there's a huge revival of Mao, and Mao's picture is much more on display than it's ever been since the Cultural Revolution. And that both Mao and Confucius are part of China's unique identity that is not Western. And the Tsar, the great Tsars, Alexander the Great and Ivan the Terrible and Catherine, all of them are part of Russia's unique identity. And so is Stalin, and so is the defeat of Hitler, and so is the hammer and sickle. And that China and Russia are fighting for a civilization type that rejects, they're basically fighting for their civilization, their unique identity that is not Western. They are saying we are not Western countries. We have a different way of seeing ourselves. We have a different identity. We are people of the land, right? We have a spiritual attachment to our land. We believe in creating one united Russia. We believe in creating one united China. We have a spiritual attachment. And we are not a nation state because there's many nationalities. We are civilization states rather than nation states. And we want to unify the peoples of our territory. We're people of the land. We're not seeking to create an empire of the sea. We're building a civilization state upon the land. And we practice an economics that is very, I guess you could say, collectivist, right? In Russia, they're not communist anymore in their ideology, but the state controls the oil, and the state controls the natural gas, and the state controls the mining industries, and the state is overseeing a farming boom, and there's a lot of wealthy oligarchs who make a lot of money, but the state subsidizes and kind of directs the economy. They don't do it in the name of Marxism, but the Communist Party is still a big part of the government, but that's not the main ideology in Russia anymore. In China, communism, their understanding of communism, which is, Marxist-Leninist ideology, Deng Xiaoping theory, or socialism with Chinese characteristics, Jiang Zemin practice and the four representations and Xi Jinping's, thought for a prosperous socialist society, this unique ideological development of the Chinese Communist Party, which very much emphasizes growth, says poverty is not socialism, to be rich is glorious, talks about the importance of Confucianism and traditional Chinese culture, but rejects aspects of it that would be rooted in feudalism, and any aspect of upholding feudalism, sees kind of Confucius and Mao as both part of China's unique identity that is not Western. These two civilization states, Russia and China, that seek to bring together great land masses and oversee massive development and poverty eradication and reject the Western system. They are fighting for something much different than just their countries, much different than just socialism or communism as we understood it in the 20th century. They're fighting for something that is in a way deeply conservative. They're fighting for something that is spiritual almost, rather than political. They are waging a war against Atlanticism and empires of the sea, against the Western financial system of imperialism, capitalism in its monopolistic stage, but also against liberal individualism, lack of group identity. They're waging a war to defend the traditional family. They're waging a war to defend the notion of collective interest and civilization, to defend the history of their civilization against the way the West is trying to just sweep away everything and declare everything to be evil and oppressive and declare a brave new world of technology. I mean, there's a lot more going on that we can understand. I think what we understood in the 20th century is a fight between imperialism, the Western capitalist system built on colonialism, and the people of the world resisting it in the name of trying to build socialism and communism. That fight continues, but it's become much more complex, and that there's much more involved. It's become much more of a spiritual battle, and that there's a Marxism in the West that is only cultural, that is obsessed with tearing things down, that is obsessed with human rights and sexuality and such. And there's a Marxism in the developing world that is tied in with civilizational history and the history of Russia and China as great civilizations, that is about development. It's much more complicated. And there's almost like a very, very deep economic, spiritual, and cultural war going on in the world today. And that's how we can understand these things. And Russia and China are the main force of opposition to Wall Street and London. And that Wall Street and London represent a dying financial system, a dying Western order, an empire of the sea, an empire about brute force, distracting tribute and building up mighty seas. And that while they're losing control of the world, they are also at the same time looting and impoverishing their homelands, and that living standards are dropping in the United States and in Britain and in France and in Germany, and people are becoming poorer, and living standards are going down, and that this is a reality of what the West is facing. And if you go throughout the Midwest of the United States, you go through the South, you go through the Pacific Northwest region. I mean, you can go through Appalachia, you can see people are really struggling, and that the West is deteriorating from within. They're unpaving the roads. The power plants are falling apart. Last winter in Texas, the power grid collapsed, and all kinds of people. It wasn't last winter. It was 3 or 4 years ago. And the power grid collapsed in the middle of the winter. People were left out in the cold in Texas. I mean, there's many examples of the Western system just falling apart and deteriorating from within as mighty cities are built up. You have New York City, where I'm living, which is a playground for rich kids, right? Most working people can't afford to live here anymore. It's turned into a gentrified playground for rich kids. And the same for Los Angeles. And that we're seeing the deterioration, the hollowing out from within of the Western civilizations to make way for these mighty cities, like the Roman Empire that was the center of Rome, like London that was at the center of what was once the British sea-based empire in the height of British colonialism. London is still a mighty center of imperialism, and we're seeing this kind of transition where the East is rising and the West is dying. And the West is dying because the Western civilization is tied up and is wrapped up in this Atlanticist, ocean-based form of empire that is largely being repudiated. And the African continent is already in the process of drifting away from the West. The West still has a foothold in a number of countries on the African continent, but Africa as a continent is drifting to Russia and China, is drifting away from the West because they are people of the land. And that Africa, a great continent, would be better if it was unified, and that Africans have been left behind and impoverished, and their resources have been exploited by Western colonialists, and Africa is starting to assert itself. And as a result, as Africa asserts itself, economically speaking, it's realizing that its future is to be a civilization of the land, to be a people of the land, eventually to create a great African civilization state with many nationalities in it, united and developing, right? The future of Africa is Pan-Africanism and is development and is a civilization of the land, a mighty civilization of the land, a unified Africa developing and building itself up as its population becomes wealthier, etc. Right? That's the future of the African continent. And Africa is realizing that China can help them build high-speed trains and railways and power plants, and the West has kept them poor for centuries of looting and genocide and colonialism and slavery, etc. Right? I'm trying to tell you what's happening in the world in the context of what Joe Biden said. But let's also listen to what the president of Russia recently said. This is what President Putin recently said. This is an interview that he gave. This is just a passing remark that the Russian president made, but it's a heavy remark. It's heavy. This is Russian President Putin.
The gist of it is different. The gist of it is that the so-called golden billion for centuries, for 500 years, they have practically lived off of other peoples. They were ripping apart these poor peoples, poor nations of Africa. They exploited Latin America. They exploited the countries of Asia. And of course, no one forgets this. And I have a feeling that it's not even about the leaders of these countries, even though it is a very important thing, but the common people of these countries. In their heart, they can feel what's happening. They can see our struggle for our independence, for our true sovereignty. And they see this connection with their aspirations to be truly independent, which is exacerbated by the fact that in the Western elites, there is a strong desire to freeze the current unfair state of things in international affairs. For centuries, they've been stuffing their stomachs with human flesh, and they've been stuffing their pockets with money, but they must realize that this ball of vampires is about to end.
Now, he said that this ball of vampires is about to end, and he's describing how the Western system of colonialism works by holding other peoples down, by impoverishing other peoples, and that it's coming to an end. That's the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, and he's explaining, that this way of being, where the West dominates the world and impoverishes the world, this way of being is coming to an end. And it's a gradual process, and it's been happening gradually, one bit at a time. You had the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, you had the Chinese Revolution, you had China's reform and opening up, and then you had the fall of the Soviet Union, but then the rise of Russian President Putin after a decade of shock therapy neoliberalism. And all of this is culminating in a situation where this Western imperialist system comes to an end. But that brings me to the point that I keep coming back to. And this is a point that many people don't seem to realize, but the American Revolution of 1776 was a revolution fought against thalassocracy. It was a revolution against the British Empire. And if you read the writings of Alexander Hamilton, and if you read the writings of Henry Charles Carey, who was the economic advisor to Abraham Lincoln and oversaw the big push to build railroads all across the United States that Abraham Lincoln advocated, that continued after Abraham Lincoln's death. If you look at that, you will see that within U.S. history, there has always been an underlying current that sought to make us a civilization of the land. There's always been a drive within the American soul that viewed this country as not part of the British system, not part of the Atlanticist system, but rather a civilization of the land. And that's always been a part of American history. There's a book that came out, a couple decades ago. It's called What's the Matter with Kansas? And it talked about how Kansas was this deeply Republican conservative state nowadays. Kansas was a state that passed a law, restricting the teaching of evolution in school. And Kansas is this deeply conservative state. But historically, that's not true for Kansas. Kansas was actually a stronghold of radical abolitionism, right? John Brown, the radical abolitionist who was martyred in the fight to defeat slavery, gave his life and died in Kansas. And in fact, there's a mural of John Brown in the Kansas state capitol. There's a mural of John Brown, the revolutionary anti-slavery fighter. And in fact, the state of Kansas was a stronghold of the socialist movement in America. The first newspaper called Workers' World was printed in Kansas, and it was edited by James Cannon. It was called Workers' World in 1919, and Alex Howitt, and there was a whole miners' struggle in the state of Kansas. And in fact, Earl Browder, who was the top leader of the American Communist Party during the Roosevelt administration, he was a man from Kansas. His nickname was the Man from Kansas. Eugene Debs was very popular in Kansas. This book came out and said, what's the matter with Kansas? What's the matter with Kansas? It was saying because Kansas historically is a very, very left-wing socialist state. But now Kansas is deeply conservative. Well, and I'll show you the image of John Brown in the Kansas state capitol building, right? This is the image of John Brown, the anti-slavery fighter. Right? This image, how can a state with this image in its state capitol building be conservative? Well, that's because leftism has changed. Right? When the Republican Party was started, it was a radically left-wing party. To be radical in the time of Abraham Lincoln meant to oppose slavery. It meant to stand up for small farmers. It meant that one was in favor of the right of women to vote. And it often usually meant that one was a religious fanatic. John Brown was a religious fanatic. There he is holding his Bible with the Alpha and the Omega in it, with his gun in one hand and his rifle in the other. He looks like a Houthi. That looks like a Houthi, right? With his beard, his huge beard, and his book in one hand and his gun in the other. John Brown looks like a Houthi. And John Brown, this guy was the most far left guy back in the 1850s that ever was around. He was a radical, extreme anti-slavery fighter. But leftism, what it means to be a leftist, has changed. And that's what that book, What's the Matter with Kansas, has kind of lost. That book is it talks about the economics of, and economic problems, but it really doesn't get to the fact that the issue in What's the Matter with Kansas, the issue is not so much, how did these people just become conservative? The issue is that what it means to be leftist has changed. That John Brown was not a Trotskyite. John Brown was not a New York City hipster. John Brown was a man of the land. He was a homesteader. and he was out in Kansas as a man of the land, as a working man of the land, fighting against slavery, fighting to maintain his religious beliefs. He was a man of the land, and that it was a socialism of the land, and it was descended from the American Revolution and Alexander Hamilton and Henry Charles Carey and the traditions that built the abolitionist movement and the labor movement in this country. That genuine American socialism is a socialism of the land. It is not a socialism of the sea. And that's what John Brown represented. And that if you want to learn genuine American socialism, not cosmopolitan New York City Trotskyism, but genuine American socialism, I recommend learning about Anna Louise Strong, one of my favorite writers, Anna Louise Strong. She was an American who was, I believe, born in Nebraska, and she spent much of her life in Ohio. She attended Oberlin College. And Anna Louise Strong, I'm going to put her picture up. Anna Louise Strong, she ended up leading the Great General Strike of Seattle in 1919. And Anna Louise Strong then moved to the Soviet Union and lived in the Soviet Union. She was the editor of the Moscow News in the Soviet Union. And she moved to the Soviet Union, and she spent her the final years of her life in the Soviet Union. And she wrote about how the Soviet Union was the new America, and that America had lost its optimism and its innovation and what, really defined the American identity. And that it was in the Soviet Union and then in China that one could see the true American spirit. She writes about this. Anna Louise Strong, the great writer. I'm very lucky to have discovered Anna Louise Strong when I was a teenager. And her writing connected with me on a deeply spiritual level. Her book, The Stalin Era, is just an amazing piece where she describes what it was like to be in the Soviet Union during the period of the 5-year plans, as Stalin mobilized to just build that country up from nothing. And then I read her autobiography, I Change Worlds. I read her work about China. She interviewed Mao Zedong. She was one of the only journalists to interview Chairman Mao Zedong, the leader of the Chinese Communist Party. Anna Louise Strong carries with her a socialism of the land, right? And that is very much who she is, with her father from Nebraska, her father who was a minister from Nebraska, and her very much her hardworking spirit and her desire to be right in her soul. Anna Louise Strong, continues that kind of John Brown tradition. And that socialism in America, if you look at its history, it's gotten very, very confused, and that we're in a very, very strange period. And that just like in Russia and in China, socialism was a way that the civilization of the land and turgocracy could push back to fight thalassocracy. The fight in American history at this point is largely, are we going to be a civilization of the land or be a civilization of the sea? And we are a total civilization of the sea at this point. All the great industrial centers, Pittsburgh, Gary, Indiana, you name it, Minneapolis, they're all destroyed. They're all falling apart, right? We once had a very prosperous American heartland, but it's been hollowed out, and the people are struggling. Whereas New York City and Los Angeles have become these great financial centers, center of Hollywood, center of Wall Street, as the heartland is being hollowed out and the population is struggling. Detroit, Toledo, Flint, absolutely, Anthony, and and that really, just like in China and just like in Russia, the fight was between civilization of the sea and civilization of the land. And they had to assert themselves by becoming a civilization of the land. Right? We're now seeing that at the same time, we're now seeing that we're at the point where Civilization of the sea is destroying the United States, and the only way we can assert ourselves is to rediscover some of that John Brown spirit, right? We have to rediscover that we are a civilization of the land, that we are people of the land, and that we are fighting back, and that we believe in economic growth, and that we are committed to our principles, and we have a collectivist identity, right? And that there's a lot more at stake. This is a much deeper spiritual battle that is happening. And we have to understand it this way. And that's what I'm trying to do with these broadcasts, right? This has been a very, very exciting journey. A very, very exciting journey that we are on, because we're trying to figure out how we can build an American socialist movement in our time that is about economic growth, that rejects imperialism and this dying global financial system that is impoverishing the world, that takes inspiration from Russia and China and et cetera, and wants to make us part of this new emerging civilization that is rising, this new economy that's rising in the world. I mean, we are engaged in uncharted waters. We're pioneers, folks. We are pioneers. That's what we are. Right? If we were to just copy what came before, that might be easy, but we wouldn't be very successful, because the stuff that's come before isn't working. People have been trying to build just a regular communist group in America for a long time. It hasn't worked out too well. And that we are in new times with new contradictions, new technology, new mindsets among the people, and that there is something deeper in the American soul that's at stake here, right? That the fight taking place within our ruling class that I've written so much about in my book, Where is America Going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution. The fight taking place now between Donald Trump and the lower levels of capital and the globalist apparatus that is committed to unending regime change wars. There's a lot more beneath the surface. There's a question of what it means to be an American and which aspects of our American identity will take over. Look, we can be honest about the fact that there are satanic evil things in our American identity. There's very good things in our American identity, but there are very evil things. Slavery, colonialism, radical individualism, the notion, screw everybody else. Look, I argue that, there's a lot written about the Protestant work ethic and Calvin and all of that. But I would argue that there is a spirit of Odinism and Germanic paganism in the American soul that is demonic in a lot of ways. For example, right? I mean, I'll give you many examples of this, but the phrase "pull yourself up by your bootstraps," that phrase "pull yourself up by your bootstraps," if you really think about it, it's a joke, right? And if you look at the origin of it, it's a mockery, because you can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It doesn't work that way, right? Try to pull yourself up by the straps of your own boots. You cannot do it, right? Gravity exists. And it was originally invented as a mockery, but people say it. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, young man, because we have this attitude that, every man's house is his castle. We're indifferent to other people's suffering, right? There's an attitude that if somebody is struggling and they can't make it, it must be their own fault. They must deserve it. Don't try to help them. Don't sympathize with them, because it's their own fault. That's an attitude in American society, right? That we can leave people aside and abandon them and ignore them, and we don't care about other people, right? This radical individualism, this lack of any group identity, that's a really ugly aspect of American society. And, we can talk about slavery. We can talk about the slaughter of the indigenous people and the denigrating of people with different cultures. There are absolutely many, many ugly things about the American spirit that we can oppose. However, within the American spirit, there is also John Brown. There's also Harriet Tubman. There's also the struggle to abolish slavery, the labor movement, Eugene Debs, Gus Hall, the suffragists, the people that fought for the rights of women, Susan B. Anthony, right? And that there is kind of a battle within the American soul that is taking place. And that our job is to reestablish the spiritual power and beauty within the American soul that brought us John Brown, that brought us the great abolitionists, that brought us Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that brought us Malcolm X, right? That in America, within American society, there is a spirit of resistance and a spirit of collectivism and a spirit of sacrifice and willingness to martyr yourself and become a martyr for what is true and to die for your principles and never back down and never surrender. You can find that within the American spirit as well. There is this never give up, never surrender, never give an inch, be right in your soul. And if you know that right and wrong exist, and you know that you are on the side of right, even if no one stands with you but God, you can do it, right? You know, there is within the American spirit a civilization of the land. There is an opposition to thalassocracy and imperialism within the American soul. Now, I think it's very, very much there if you look at American history, and it's very much there now. And in fact, many, many Americans are longing for it. And they're confused. I believe there's a lot of people that are politically lost and homeless because, you know, like myself, I spent my entire adult life trying to be a communist, right? That was what I wanted to be. I read about Anna Louise Strong, and I read about Stalin, and I read basic economic data. I learned that, you know, we're taught in the United States, communism never worked anywhere. It never had any economic successes. And I learned, you know, by reading the encyclopedia and reading basic economic data at a young age, the Soviet Union invented space travel. The Soviet Union rapidly industrialized and became a superpower, an industrial power, building more steel than any other country in the world. You know, they had huge, great economic achievements. And so I just couldn't accept this. And everyone around me was saying, well, no, communism just doesn't work. It doesn't work. And I said, that's not true. And as a young person growing up in a very conservative area, I saw that this free market ideology is bull honky. This notion that the state shouldn't oversee healthcare and provide us with healthcare, this notion that the state shouldn't plan out the economy in order to ensure growth, that we should just let the market take care of itself, that's bull honky. It's just malarkey. Right? And the modern economists, the Milton Friedman ideology that is just spoon-fed to us, that the market just naturally leads to the best solutions, that's just not true. And I learned that at a young age. And so the natural response was to be a communist, right? And so I sought out communist groups. I joined the anti-Iraq war protest movement, and I ended up working for Ramsey Clark. But those communist groups are all infected with Trotskyism. And they're all infected with the ideology of the land. And they are all infected with Atlanticism. They're fighting a culture war. They're not fighting an economic battle. They see average Americans as the enemy. They see the bulk of the population as irredeemable. They want to tear it down and burn it down. And they celebrate chaos and destruction. And they're spiritually not in line with what Stalin was doing, or with what Mao was doing, or with what John Brown was doing. They're engaged in a kind of teenage Satanism, you might call it, but they're also very much fighting for globalism and fighting for a civilization of the land and fighting to spread liberal values all over the world and fighting to break people down into atomized individuals. And they may do it in the name of Marxism, but they're really not concerned about economics. There's no economic foundation to what they're saying. They are very much waging a culture war. They're very much trying to get revenge. That Marxism or communism in America has not been, really since the 1960s, since the rise of the New Left, has not been an economic movement for society to rationally organize the means of production. It has rather been a cultural movement to break down tradition, to break down any collective identity, right? That has been what Marxism is. Marxism has become Atlanticism. It has become one form of Atlanticism, whereas conservatives emphasize the economics of Atlanticism, free trade, privatizations, economic liberalism. The so-called left emphasizes social liberalism, right? And the idea of atomizing people as individuals, no community obligation, etc. And that it's just a fight of which type of Atlanticism do you believe in? Which type of radical liberal Western ideology do you believe in? And there are a lot of young people now that are becoming MAGA or becoming followers of Nick Fuentes or becoming, converting to Islam or converting to the Russian Orthodox faith. That's really common. A lot of young people are lost. They don't know where to go. And, there are some like me who are becoming communists. And there are some like others that are becoming fascists or nationalists of some variety or conspiracy oriented. Some of them are adopting different religious teachings from the Middle East or religious teachings from Russia. There is a lot of young people looking to find a solution. And what the Center for Political Innovation, which is my organization, what we are striving to do is to say you're not going to find the answer in an ideology of the past, and you're not going to find the answer in something foreign. Right? We have to find the answer within ourselves. We need to learn the economics of Marxism, the understanding of historical progress, the understanding of the relationship between technology and crisis, automation, the tendency of the falling rate of profit, the coal miner's riddle, all of this. We need to understand why capitalism cannot withstand great technological leaps and why the civilizations of the East are rising and why the computer revolution is ripping apart the West. We need to understand the economics of imperialism that Lenin explained, about how the big banks dominate the world and impoverish countries, and how the wars that are waged are about enforcing this brutal international system. We need to understand Marxism. But we need to understand, more importantly, the civilizations around the world that are fighting imperialism. Why is Fidel Castro so loved, not just in Cuba, but all over the world? What did Fidel Castro do? What did he do in Cuba? What did he do with his literacy campaigns and his volunteers? What did Fidel Castro do? And why is it that in Russia today, the Soviet Union and communism, as well as the Russian Orthodox Church and Alexander the Great and all of that is part of their tradition? Why? What's going on there? Why is it that Confucianism and filial piety and the traditions of Chinese civilization going back 5,000 years now have unity with communism? Why is this? But ultimately, what can we find in the American spirit and in the spiritual nature of Americans and in our culture and in our way of life and our way of being that can rescue our country? How can we draw from the American spirit to create something powerful enough to push back against imperialism and build a civilization of the land? How can we be people of the land here in America fighting back? How can we be people of the land fighting back in America in our time? In the year of 2024, how can we be people of the land fighting back against empire, fighting back against imperialism, defending our families, our homes, our civilizations, our communities? How can we be people of the land fighting back here in America in the year of 2025? That is the question we must wrangle with in our time, and it is not an easy question. And I'm not saying that I have the answer. We have a 4-point economic plan, 4 dramatic points that would restructure our economy. We have certain economic theories. We have inspiration from different peoples around the world who've defeated imperialism and built up their own civilization. And there's plenty we can learn from. But ultimately, it's a scientific process. It's a process of trial and error. How do we build a collectivist organization in our times? How do we do it? And how do we cultivate and build a bloc within U.S. society that can defeat imperialism? How can we be anti-imperialists within the center of the dying empire? How can we develop an ideology that will bring peoples from all across the world, of all different backgrounds and beliefs, from different corners of the planet, different ancestries, different life experiences, men, women, people of all different races, religions, ethnicities? How can we bring them together to build a movement against imperialism here in the United States? This is a very exciting question, and I'm excited about it. I'm very, very excited about it. But I don't claim that it's going to be easy, and I've spent my entire adult life trying and learning through the process of traveling around the world, through the process of organizing with people, fighting with people, bringing people together, trying different things. And it's not an easy thing to do. And this is a very, very hard time to organize in. Let me tell you that. People don't want to be in a group. You know, you talk about gravity. There's almost anti-gravity between people, right? People don't want to work with other people. People don't want to look up to somebody else and say, I learned from you. People don't want to follow other people. They all want to be the main character in the movie, right? We all think we're the main character in the movie. We all think we know everything, and no one's ever taught us anything. None of us have humility, and we all are very, very afraid, and we're all very, very ashamed, and we all feel that we're not good enough. And it's very, very hard to organize in our time. Our people, we have been psychologically fucked. We have been fucked psychologically as a generation. What they have done to us with Twitter and Facebook and social media and Netflix, I mean, they have fucked us psychologically. So getting people to come together in a group and pull off an operation and work together and overcome their differences and forgive each other when somebody makes a mistake and look past aspects of people and other people that might annoy us. It's very difficult to do. It's not easy, especially when we have just a chorus, a mantra, a drumbeat constantly of there is no hope, there is no hope, give up, there is no hope, there is no future, be a doomer, there is no, we have this drumbeat going on, coming at us from our cell phones, coming at us from our TV screens, coming at us from the radio, everywhere, the billboards, everything. They've got this drumbeat of death that they're pumping at us every day. There is no hope, there is no hope, give up, surrender, surrender, surrender. They are constantly trying to demoralize us, constantly getting us to not believe in ourselves, to not believe in humanity, to not be optimistic, right? We are wrestling against Satan in full force. I mean, they are at us, trying to isolate us from each other, trying to destroy our will to keep going, trying to destroy our dreams and our optimism, trying to not motivate us. We are up against a barrage of enemies, but yet we keep going. We keep doing this because there's many of us that realize this is the only way to really be alive in our time. This is the only way to not be asleep, right? You before you start living this way, before you join the revolutionary movement, you're walking around, but it's almost like you're asleep, like you're in a trance. Most people walk through this world in a trance. They're in a trance. They're looking at their phone and they're just in a trance. They're lost. They don't know what's going on. Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton. I don't know what's going on. But what's happening? Catch a Pokemon Go. Got to catch them all. They don't know what's going on. Like most people are in a trance. They're just in a trance and they don't get it. And they just kind of exist, and everything around them is falling to shreds. And they're watching it, and everyone's angry, and people are angry about what's happening to their community, and they don't know what to do, and they're in a trance. And when you finally get to be part of this, it's like something wakes up inside of you. It's like your brain turns on, and you're like, I get it now. This is what's happening. There's different factions in the ruling class. There's an economic crisis rooted in the tendency of the falling rate of profits and the problem of overproduction or value crisis. We are living in the dying system of imperialism, and Eurasia has broken out of that system. And they're desperate to lock down society with a low-wage police state, and they're pushing for a new world war in order to save their system, but the bulk of humanity, and it's like you're like, whoa, I can see. It's like that movie They Live, when he puts the glasses on. You see it, and you see it all around you. And you see the divisions in the ruling class. And you see the drive for human creativity, and you see their efforts to constantly stamp it out with their satanic evil propaganda. And you see why they hate Russia and why they hate China. And you see it all. It all starts to make sense to you. And you get it. And you understand why you're here. That you have a really, really important role to play because you're living in the center of the empire. You're living in the center of the dark forces. You are living in the center of where all this evil is. And you are a human. And you believe in love, and you believe in joy, and you have creative energy, and you are here to bring light into this center of darkness. And you're here because your life is supposed to mean something, right? And you wake up and you get it, and it makes sense to you, and you are truly alive. You're truly alive when you embrace this movement, but it's hard. It's hard, and you got to stay engaged. You've got to stay engaged. Folks, I got to tell you, a lot is going on in my life right now. I got some bad news today, but it's not conclusive, right? I mean, the situation in my life right now, a lot of things are up in the air, and I did get what looked like some bad news today, but I don't know the details yet. I just know a certain thing that I heard, and I was given a certain bit of information today that was not good. Not good. And I do apologize because I missed the morning message. I did my stream last night. I went to bed. I forgot to schedule the morning message that someone had sent in. And I apologize. I really do. I'm trying to stay on top of things. I don't know what's coming. I know I'm going to be okay. And I know that you all are here for me and that we're going to get through whatever hardships are thrown at us. But I did get some very bad news today, and I admit I have been somewhat distracted, but I feel bad about that. I really do, because the morning messages are so important because they keep you engaged. The only hope you have for beating this, the only hope you have for staying on the revolutionary road and not just being succumbed, is you've got to stay engaged. I need to stay engaged. You need to stay engaged. We need to be engaged. And the morning messages enable people to be engaged. It enables you to start your day with revolutionary hope and optimism. It shows you a different member of our community who gives a message, and I am going to do better about that. And I do apologize to all of you for missing the morning message. There's one already scheduled for tomorrow. It's a great message. It's a short one, but it's a great one. But we as a community, we've got to be there for each other, and we've got to stay engaged. And we got to march forward, and we have to have goals, right? I am absolutely insisting that we work to have 400 people at our convention next July. And that goal I made, it pissed a lot of people off, but we need to be growing. That's the point. We need to be growing. And if, we've had events with 200 people before, well, we got a whole year until next July. We got to do better than that. We got to have a goal. We got to be advancing. We got to be seeing progress. We got to be expanding our movement and expanding our message. And if we're not doing that, what are we doing? So I made the goal of 400 people, pissed some people off, whatever. But I'm insisting that we have that goal. If we don't reach the goal, I think we'll reach it very easily. But if we don't, it's not the end of the world. And we'll figure out why. And then we'll set another goal, and we'll build, and we'll have an even better event. And we've got to be advancing, and we've got to stay engaged. We've got to be advancing, and we have got to stay engaged, right? And that we cannot fall off the wagon, so to speak. We cannot just surrender, and we cannot just back down. And that's why I am so committed to the morning messages, and I see them as so important. That's why I need you all to make morning messages. And lately, you all have been doing a great job, but we got to stay ahead, right? I've got a number of morning messages. We're good for the next few days, but more is better. So take the time to go and record one now. Let's stay ahead. I need more morning messages. We've got to stay engaged. And we've got to do what we can do, right? And that a lot is up in the air. I don't know what's happening in the next month. I mean, a lot of crazy things are happening. One thing I do know is that I am headed to Chicago on October 12th. That I do know. This is happening, folks. This is happening. October 12th, I will be in the Chicago area for an all-day workshop. Peter Coffin's going to be there. He's confirmed as well. We're heading to Chicagoland to put on a great all-day workshop. Be there or be square. Go ahead and register and sign up. Mass email just went out today with our new email system and all of that. And I'm very excited about it. But register. Go ahead and register, please. And we're going to have an all-day socialist education, anti-imperialist education workshop. It's going to be really, really awesome. So that I know is happening. And beyond that, I don't quite know what's going to happen in the next couple of months. I might have a better idea in the next few days, but I honestly don't know, right? I don't know. But what I do know is that this is what I'm all about. This is what I believe in. This is where I'm going. This is where we're headed. And I'm not backing down. And that this is about more than just me. It's about more than just you. It's about the future of civilization. It's about the future of our country. And that we owe it to ourselves and we owe it to our community to get through this. And that we have such an important role to play. We have such an important role to play. And I mean, I've got a lot on my mind tonight. I must say, I've got a lot on my mind. But you guys are a big part of it. You guys are on my mind. You guys are on my mind constantly because you're the people that I come on here night after night to talk to. Right. And so I hope that my remarks for tonight about Sleepy Joe and his stupid comment about, his stupid comments about China. They gave me, an opportunity, an opening to, to say what I needed to say. And, I hope that I got the message across, and I hope that I've explained things in a way that it means something to you. And I hope that you will understand why I'm so committed to building this community and building this organization, and why I get on here night after night after night. And I hope you'll get it. I hope you'll come and see us in Chicago, and you'll become part of our community, and you'll meet people. I hope you'll do all of that. That's really what I hope you'll do. I really, really hope that you will do that. So, I guess those are my opening remarks for tonight. So let's do the roll call. Names and locations. And I will call you all out as I see you. Then after that, I will answer any super chats. I got one super chat here. It's an important one. It's a topic I've been meaning to talk about. Oh, I got a Rumble rant here. We'll go from there. Lawrence Johnson, you're in Chicago. Have you registered for the workshop yet? Register for the workshop, Lawrence. Link down below. It's in Chicago. Can't wait to meet you. Chad in Spokane. Joe in North Carolina. Courtney in Northern Virginia. Bob in Troy, New York. Rice in Adelaide, Australia. Ryan in Kansas City. Riverside, California. Stephen Morris. Jeff in Delaware. Thank you, Caleb, for what you do. You're welcome. Dan lives in the LA area. Good. Jacob in Wisconsin. Welcome. Are you coming to the workshop, Jacob? Have you registered? Are you going to be there? Rachel in Winder, Georgia. Ian in Yukon. Hillary in Wales. Anthony in Detroit. Anthony, are you coming to the workshop? Or have you registered? Go ahead and register, right? Carolyn and Dario from Brooklyn. Welcome. Auckland, New Zealand. Balthazar in Oakland. Tyblee in Pennsylvania. Patrick in May. Auckland, New Zealand. Viva Brazil. Shannon in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Toey in Sweden. Sherry in Cape May. Patrick in Maine. The Seasoned Noob in China. Cyborg Ninja in Orlando. Kentucky. Welcome. Philip in Brooklyn. Shout out to Philip. We love you, Phil. St. David's, Bermuda. Neil Frazier is out in Hong Kong, and he said he's going to make a morning message. So please go ahead. That would be awesome, Neil. Alex in Brazil. Jack Dawkins in Pierce, Arizona. Amway from India. He does great morning messages. Jorge in Chino. China Nice. Mr. Wonderful. Quanos. Good to have you with us. Good to have you with us. Names and locations. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Who's with us? Who's with us? Who's with us? Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? All right. All right. I am so glad to be here with all of you tonight. You know, oh, Horatio is an Argentine. I knew him, Horatio, right? Alas, poor Yorick. I knew him, Horatio. He will have borne me upon his back 1,000 times. Saint Adele. Wrong spell. Very good. All right. The Beeman. The Beeman. All right. The first super chat is from, or it's a Rumble rant, and it's from Hempcar. And he says, what do you think about Whitney Webb's work and her book, The United States of Blackmail? Now, I haven't read her book yet, but I should get a copy because I love her journalism about Jeffrey Epstein, right? No one has dug deeper into it than she has. So One Nation Under Blackmail by Whitney Webb, paperback. I am getting myself a copy. I am going to read that book because that sounds like a book that I need to read. And so I am ordering it right now. I did not realize that she had written a book. I knew she'd written a lot of articles, and I've always been impressed by her journalistic work. But now I'm getting that book right now because that sounds like something I need to read. I agree pretty much based on what I've seen that what she has said about how Jeffrey Epstein existed more or less as an Israeli honeypot to get people in a position, you know, in which they would, you know, be vulnerable, be caught, you know, doing something, and then Israel had blackmail on them. I think that's very accurate. It looks to me like that's exactly what Jeffrey Epstein is, and I've heard her make the case for it. It's a very strong case, and so I'm impressed. You know, I think it's very, very possible, and so I will actually read her book. I just ordered my copy from Amazon so that I can see the case she makes. I think that she is very impressive. I am a Whitney Webb fan, so I cannot wait to read it. All right. Thoughts on the new Marxist-Leninist Sri Lankan president? Well, I was very, very happy to see what's his name? He's known by his initials. You know, but he's from the Communist Party in Sri Lanka, which is it's a Marxist-Leninist Communist Party. And he won on an AKD is what he goes by, right? You know, and he won on an anti-corruption platform, and that he is a real communist, right? I mean, that he's very friendly to North Korea. He's been to North Korea before, and his political party has a special relationship with North Korea, and that they at one point they were involved in an armed conflict. But I think it's also interesting, if you look over the history of this party, that they have very much adopted the ideology of you know, they've adopted a communism specifically to Sri Lanka's situation, right? You know, AKD, they've adopted what they call national ideology or national thought, and they have socialism with Sri Lankan characteristics. That they are from the Marxist-Leninist tradition. They're very close to the government of North Korea, but they also, you know, they have their own kind of ideology. Now, I understand they're a very pro-China political party, and that they're friendly to China. They're very anti-imperialist, and that, you know, in the context of Sri Lanka, what it means to be a Marxist-Leninist from the JVP party, or the People's Liberation Front party is what their party is called, the People's Liberation Front, and their youth wing is called the Red Guards. That you know, they are part of that people of the land kind of socialism tradition, right? They're not, these are not Western leftists, right? These are not teenagers with pink hair and nose rings, okay? This is a real party with a real base of thousands of people and communities who support them. This is a group of people that are inspired by Kim Il-sung. They were also very close to Ba'athist Arab socialism and very close to Iraq and inspired by the Iraqi socialist government that existed. You know, and you know, they very much had their own worldview, and they developed a unique ideology for Sri Lanka. That this is a revolutionary people of the land party, and this is an anti-corruption candidate. And this is a guy who is very friendly to China, and he's an anti-imperialist, and he won the elections. AKD. You know, we'll be able to tell he's doing a good job. We have to see, right? Let's be real. Like, there have been a lot of socialists elected in Latin America who absolutely sucked, right? This, you know, Petro in Colombia, not impressed. The current government of Bolivia, not impressed. Current government of Chile, not impressed. They're from the left, but yeah, you know, I mean, they're not impressive. Nicaragua, I like. Venezuela, I like. You know, those are real socialist governments. And the way we'll be able to tell that AKD is doing any good, and the new government in Sri Lanka is doing good, is when they call him a dictator. I'm waiting for that. As soon as they start calling him a dictator in American media, I'll know he's doing a good job. No, you can be sure of that. No, they even call Modi a dictator in U.S. media, right? You know, I mean, Modi is totally free market and all of that, but he will do business with Russia, and so U.S. media is already calling Modi a dictator. So if AKD gets in there and he starts to really change society in Sri Lanka and starts to improve things for the working class, U.S. media, you will be absolutely sure, like clockwork, they'll call him a dictator. They'll say, oh my God, AKD is a Stalinist dictator. Oh, and he's a Russia, China-backed dictator who's oppressing his people. And then we'll know he's doing a great job. So I'm just waiting for that. I cannot wait. The second that I see that AKD, the new leader of Sri Lanka, is a dictator, a communist dictator, then I'll know he's doing a good job. So that just wait for it, right? And as soon as we see the hate for him in American media, as soon as we have a bunch of people from Sri Lanka all over American television going, I escaped from the evil dictator regime, then we'll know that he's a good guy, right? Then we'll know. Yeah, you know, it took me a long time to, well, it didn't really take me a long time to tell you the truth, but it's something that certain people just can't understand. There will never be, and I said this to Vosh in my debate, in my closing statement. I hope he learned from it. Or maybe I don't, because whatever. But there will never be a socialism that the New York Times will approve of. Okay? There are some people that really have it in their heads that everything they read in the New York Times and all of that about the communist governments is true. And that, you know, if only socialist governments would just not be evil dictatorships, then people would all like socialism. And it's like they just don't get it, right? That the New York Times, no matter who they are, the New York Times, mainstream media, if they're actually building socialism and they're actually anti-imperialist, is going to call them an evil dictatorship, authoritarian, violating human rights. That's like part of the game, okay? And until we realize that, we're lost. And there's a lot of people that are Marxists, that are leftists, or at least call themselves that, and they have it in their head that somehow there's going to be a socialism somewhere. It'll happen somewhere. And the New York Times and the American government will say, well, you know what? We don't agree with it, but they haven't violated any human rights yet. Oh boy, they're recognized. They're just a legit government. So I guess we just have to let them go. We'll stop. We won't invade them. We won't put sanctions on them because they're just recognizing human rights. They're just respectable. And these people live in fantasy land. They really do. They don't understand that if they call it dictatorship, if they lose. Let me say that again. They call it dictatorship if they lose. And if they win, it's not a dictatorship, right? And this is how it is, right? This is how it is in American discourse. There was a great, well, I shouldn't say great, but there was a very self-exposing article in the Wall Street Journal a few years ago. And it was called It was about the trend of democratic regression. Democratic regression. And it was talking about how all over the world there are people who get elected and win in elections, but then it stops being democracy because these elected leaders change society, right? Putin won the elections very clearly, but he changed society. And so that makes him a dictator, right? And that, Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, he won the elections, but he changed society. And that makes him a dictator. And that how there are these independent institutions that leaders shouldn't be able to tamper with. And if they tamper with them, it becomes dictatorship. What are these independent institutions? The police, the military, the economy, private companies. And if you have an elected president who changes the way the police act, who changes the way the military act, who regulates and controls the economy, they're a dictator. And it was the most blatant thing I've ever seen, because we know these are not independent institutions. The police are not independent. Anyone who's ever been on strike and been on a picket line knows the police are not independent. Anyone who is part of Occupy Wall Street knows the police are not independent. There's nothing against individuals, but the police as an institution, as the capitalist state, have to serve the class that's in power. Right? And the military, right? We know the U.S. military is not independent. The U.S. military, again, we love the soldiers, but as an institution, it's sent to fight wars for Wall Street. It's not independent, right? And the corporations are not independent. And that if you have a government that asserts control over the police, asserts control over the military, and starts forcing these institutions to work differently, that's good. That's good. And it's not making them not independent. That's changing the nature of these things. And if a mass popular movement exists in a country, and that mass popular movement gives birth to a leader who comes in and changes the economy and makes it serve the people, and changes the military and changes the police, that's a good thing. But they say, well, that's not democracy, even though the people voted for it. What's the definition of democracy? What is the definition of democracy? It's the will of the people. So if the people of Russia clearly want Putin, he's one of the most popular leaders in the world. So how is it not a democracy? Well, because he's changed society. Of course he's changed society. That's why they voted for him. They say, well, Venezuela, the people in Venezuela clearly wanted Hugo Chavez. He's wildly popular. They clearly want Maduro. But it's not a democracy because he changed society. Well, that's why they voted for him, to change society. So, this note, and I read this article about democratic regression. It just made my head spin. It basically just said there's certain people that are in power, and those people are not elected. They run the corporations and the economy. They run the military. They run the policing agencies, and they're supposed to be in charge, and they're just de facto supposed to be in charge. And it's called independence, and it's an open, free society if they're in charge. And if somebody gets elected and stops them from being in charge, then it's a dictatorship because they're supposed to de facto be in charge. And I read that in the Wall Street Journal, and it was just like, thank you for this blatant honesty. It's not about rule of the people. It's about they are de facto supposed to be in charge. Wall Street and its paid stooges and the intelligence apparatus of the United States and the military brass installed and in bed with the military-industrial complex and the big Wall Street monopolies, they are supposed to be in charge. And as long as they're in charge, it's an open society, it's a free society. These institutions that are under their control are independent and free. And as long as they're in charge, they're fine with it. But if a leader gets in and starts telling them what to do and stops taking their orders and makes the police independent and change and makes the police follow him rather than them and makes the corporations do what he says, then he's a dictator. And that's how this game is played. So if AKD, the new leader in Sri Lanka, calls himself a Marxist-Leninist communist, friend of North Korea, has been to North Korea a number of times, loves Kim Il-sung, I'm starting to like him. Everything I'm hearing about him, everything I'm hearing about him, I like, but we will know after he gets into office, he'll take office and he'll start changing society. And if U.S. media calls him a dictator, that means he's changing society, and that means he's a good guy. That's how it is. That's my opinion. So we'll know once he takes office. I am done judging any leader by what they call themselves. Anyone can call themselves anything. I could call myself a fascist, a communist, a Christian, a Muslim. I could call myself a dentist. I could call myself an orthodontist. Why? I could even call myself a dental hygienist. I could call myself an anthropologist. I could call myself anything, but what matters is what I do. That's what matters. It's what I do. You shall know them by their fruits, was said by Jesus Christ. You shall know them by their fruits. I judge politicians by what they do, not by what they say. Okay? And so, we shall see. This leader in El Salvador, I like him. I like this leader in El Salvador, right? He's not a socialist, right? And the people who came before him in El Salvador called themselves socialist and didn't do anything. And this guy in El Salvador, what's his name again? The leader of El Salvador, its name is escaping me, but he's good. That guy's great. I really like him, right? The president of El Salvador, that dude is. I like what he's doing. He's wiping out the drug dealing gangs and fighting the narcos, and he's building infrastructure, and he's giving people jobs. That guy in El Salvador, the Bitcoin guy, that guy is really awesome. Bukele is awesome. Now, Bukele doesn't call himself a socialist. I don't care. He's doing what any good socialist leader would do, teaming up with China, crushing the drug gangs, giving people jobs, giving people health care, building up the economy of his country. Good for him. He doesn't call himself a socialist. I don't care, right? Putin in Russia doesn't call himself a socialist, put oil and gas under public ownership, controlled the economy to reboot the Russian economy, make sure people have jobs and education, build up the economy, re-establish the industrial base. I like it. But this guy in Colombia, Petro or whatever, he calls himself left. He calls himself a socialist, but nothing's getting better in Colombia. Don't care, right? This guy in Chile, right? He calls himself a socialist. Oh boy, he calls him. Nothing's getting better. I don't care, right? The government in Bolivia. I mean, Bolivia is more complicated, but at the end of the day, right? It's about what you do, and if you do good things, the U.S. imperialist media will attack you and call you a brutal dictator. That's how it works because they don't get to be the dictators anymore, and and they'll do good things. And if, AMLO in Mexico, now he calls himself a socialist, but he softened it, right? He, before he got elected, he really toned it down. But then when he was in office, he was in a weird state because the Mexican police is thoroughly in bed with the American police, right? The Mexican military is completely controlled by the American military. And he's, from the socialist tradition, a leader of teachers' unions and teachers' strikes. And he toned down a lot of his socialist rhetoric and he built a coalition and he got elected. And the Communist Party or the Labor Party of Mexico was part of his coalition, but so were a lot of other parties. And he did a lot of great things for Mexico. Now, Mexico is not a fully socialist country. And, the next president to come in is a little bit different. But she's, aligned with him. But AMLO did great things in Mexico, but and they were calling him a dictator. You'll notice every so often they would start up with he's a dictator and then they would back off from it. And that AMLO led, what you can call a popular front government or a coalition government. And with that coalition, he did good stuff in Mexico. A lot of good things happened under AMLO's leadership in Mexico. So sometimes you have a mixed government, and Modi is a similar figure. Modi, I think, is very good in how he doesn't take orders from the United States and how, he stands up for India. But there's some of his other policies I'm not necessarily a huge fan of. So Modi is a mixed figure, and AMLO is a mixed figure, but he did a lot, in the position he was in, with the military run by the United States, with the police run by the United States, with a lot of the people in the government against him and all of that. AMLO was able to get some really good things done. And you'll notice that AMLO actually defended Trump. He said that the election may have been stolen from Donald Trump. He didn't give recognition to Joe Biden immediately. And AMLO actually had a better relationship with Donald Trump than he did with Joe Biden. So it's a complicated thing. So there we go. All right. What do you think of the Muslim mayor of Hamtramck, Michigan, endorsing Donald Trump? crediting Donald J. Trump's desire for Middle East peace. That's interesting. Now, I lived in Hamtramck, full disclosure. I actually lived in Hamtramck for a summer. In 2008, the summer that Barack Obama was elected president, I lived in Hamtramck. There's a big statue of the Pope in Hamtramck. Hamtramck is a city in Detroit, and it's completely surrounded by Detroit. It's like a city within a city. It's like there's Detroit, and then there's like a circle inside of Detroit that's called Hamtramck, and it's Polish historically. It's a historically Polish city. But at this point, it's almost entirely Muslim, right? Arab Americans have moved there. Dearborn, Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit, is the highest concentration of Arab Americans anywhere. And a lot of Hamtramck is a lower income area of Detroit, and a lot of Muslims from Dearborn and others. And Hamtramck is majority Muslim at this point. It's a historically Polish city within Detroit city limits. They've got a statue of Pope John Paul II there, and everything's Polish, a lot of Polish restaurants, but now it's entirely Muslim. And what's interesting, and this is what I think is really going on there. I'll give you my estimate. All right. I'm not there on the ground, and I don't know exactly what's happening, but I'll tell you what I think is really going on there. Right. And you'll notice that in Hamtramck, and someone pointed out they've banned LGBT flags in Hamtramck, and that you saw there were a lot of Muslims who were going to school boards and yelling about pornographic books in the schools and things like that. And that, that was in Hamtramck also, right? Muslims in other places are not as cooperative with Republicans, but in Hamtramck, the Muslims there are very cooperative with the Republican Party. Why? Detroit, the city of Detroit, is run by the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party runs Detroit, and it is corrupt and it is awful, right? And it's the Democrats that run Detroit, and there is a rivalry in Detroit and in Cleveland and a lot of other cities. There is a rivalry between Arab Americans and black people, all right? And the media plays that up. When I was in Cleveland, I worked at a gas station, and I remember people would come into the gas station. Is this gas station run by Arabs? Is this run by Arabs? And then we'd say, no, whatever. Okay, I would never shop at a place run by Arab. There's an attempt on the part of the media to play black people and Arabs against each other. That's just, it happens, right? And that a lot of the stores in black neighborhoods in Cleveland and Detroit and Pittsburgh and places like that are run by Middle Eastern folks, and there's kind of a rivalry there. The Democrat Party of Detroit is black people. It is run by black people. Detroit is a overwhelmingly black city. It had a black mayor, Coleman Young, who was actually tied to some communist groups and was kind of a revolutionary historically. But at this point, it is African Americans that run the Democrat Party of Detroit. And they are very corrupt, and they're Obama, Kamala Harris, corrupt, whatever. And there's a rivalry. There's like an ethnic rivalry between black people and Arab Americans. There is a long-standing ethnic rivalry there. And so the Arab Americans, the Arab Americans, they are fighting probably to some level or other, on an ethnic level. They're fighting the black leadership of the Democrat Party of Detroit. And because they're at odds with the local Democrat Party, they're going to be friendlier to Republicans. And so then there's the social issue. The Democrat Party has made itself socially liberal, LGBT, pride flags, that whole deal. So Muslims are socially conservative, and a lot of black people are socially conservative. A lot of African Americans don't want their kids learning LGBT stuff in school, don't think the trans thing is good. It's about 50-50. About 50% of black people are against gay marriage. And so in Detroit, right, you have the corrupt Democrat Party that's there, and you have the Arab American community that feels pushed around by them. And so they've seen that LGBT issue is something that can give them a wedge, and that it seems like the Muslim mayor of Hamtramck is pushing back against the Democrat Party, and he's using that LGBT issue as a wedge. And it makes perfect sense he would endorse Trump, actually, given the context, right? Around the country, we're not seeing Muslims endorsing Trump. We're seeing them endorse Jill Stein, right? Muslim American groups overwhelmingly are voting for Jill Stein because Jill Stein is against what Israel's doing, and Kamala Harris is not. Now, Trump is for what Israel's doing. Now, it seems like you're telling me that this mayor of Hamtramck, who's a Muslim, actually went as far as endorsing Trump, even though Trump says all these pro-Israel things, even though Trump is trying to make it sound like Kamala Harris is anti-Israel, which she is not. You're telling me he's endorsed Trump. And that, I think, is related more to local politics. But to be honest, I kind of agree with him. And this, again, this is going to make a lot of people mad. Every time I say things like this on the chat, people get really angry. But I'm just telling you, Donald Trump, you're right. He wants to convince you he is more pro-Israel than Kamala. He wants to convince you, I am the best friend Israel ever had. I am more pro-Israel than anybody. That's what he says, okay? But I'm telling you, Donald Trump wants to be remembered well in history. He wants to go down in history as a great president. That's what he said. He wants to go down in history remembered as a great president. And he also remembers that Israel stabbed him in the back last time. Netanyahu and all of them stabbed him in the back last time. And in his art of the comeback, he says you get payback. You remember when you have a downfall, you see who is your real friends and who's not, and then you get payback, is what he said. Now, that leads me to think that even though Trump is positioning himself as super pro-Israel and all of that, when Donald Trump gets in, he actually, and the other thing is, and this is where it gets weird, only Nixon could go to China. And when Nixon met with Mao, he actually said to Mao, no Democrat would ever be able to do what I did because they'd be called soft on communism. But because I'm a conservative, I'm a rightist, I could go to China and make peace with China. And honestly, because Trump is so pro-Israel, because Trump murdered Qasem Soleimani, moved the embassy, his son-in-law is Jewish, his daughter's converted to Judaism, because of that, maybe Trump could actually stand up to Israel. Because no one's ever going to call Trump a Muslim. No one's ever going to say that Trump is a Muslim. No one's ever going to say Trump is working for the Palestinians. No one's ever going to say that. So maybe Donald Trump, maybe he would be able to say no to Israel, right? Because Kamala is going to be on the defensive. Even though Kamala is so pro-Israel, she's married to a pro-Israel activist, for Christ's sakes, right? But maybe Donald Trump could challenge them. Maybe this mayor of Detroit is onto something. Now, I'm not saying that's the case. And clearly the obvious answer is no, Donald Trump is more pro-Israel than Kamala. He's accusing Kamala of being not pro-Israel. But maybe this mayor of Detroit knows something. And again, maybe, and this is, I'm just telling you, right? The Trump people really want to hate China. They want to hate China. They want to be like, we like Russia. We're not excited about fighting Russia, but we hate China. But China and Russia are closer than ever. So the idea, like, and you'll notice the Ukrainiac who tried to kill Donald Trump, that Ukrainiac also wrote a book about Taiwan. He's also a Taiwaniac, right? And so, and the Trump people would be like, well, we like Taiwaniacs. We just hate Ukrainiacs. Well, Taiwaniacs and Ukrainiacs are the same. And Russia and China are closer than ever. And that if Donald Trump is really being fought by the U.S. regime change war apparatus, that U.S. regime change war apparatus is tied in with Israel. It's a pro-Israel entity. Israel did the coup in Ukraine. Go and read about how Netanyahu, yes, the Israelis were in bed with the Ukrainian Nazis, right? Even though the Ukrainian nationalists hate Jews, even though they honor Stepan Bandera, who put Jews in the ovens in the Holocaust, Israel and the Mossad worked with the United States to overthrow the Ukrainian government and to move against Russia. And I'm telling you that if Donald Trump is really being fought by the George Soros apparatus, that George Soros apparatus is in bed with Israel. And if Donald Trump really gets pushed into really fighting the U.S. foreign policy establishment, not saying that's a long shot, that's a real long shot, that'll force Donald Trump to collide with Israel at some point, because Israel's on the wrong side everywhere. Everywhere in the world that you go, Israel is always on the pro-imperialist side. There is nowhere, right? There is nowhere in the world that Israel is on the right side. Nowhere. right? They have their finger in different places, right? Israel, I mean, I think they were trying to court Cuba as a friend at various points, right? Israel, they have their finger in different places. But overwhelmingly, Israel is always on the wrong side of everything. And so if Donald Trump is going to be forced, reluctantly kicking and screaming to be on the right side, he's going to be forced to be anti-Israel. Now, that I'm not saying that that's going to happen. That's a huge leap. I will say that Donald Trump, if you listen to him, he's totally pro-Israel. I think Donald Trump personally, I think he's pro-Israel on a personal level. I think, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, his daughter, they're pro-Israel. I think Donald Trump is pro-Israel. But that said, at this point, the Trump camp is way nicer to the anti-Israel faction among their own ranks than the Democrats are, okay? The Nick Fuentes people and Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes and Candace Owens are part of the Trump universe. They are, right? They are, right? People that are in the Trump universe, they listen to Candace Owens, they listen to Nick Fuentes. They're allowed to be part of it. Are any anti-Israel people allowed to be part of the Democrat universe? Not at all. They didn't let a single Palestinian speak at the Chicago Democrat convention. Not a single one. The Democrat Party has just bent over backwards for Israel, whereas Trump is totally pro-Israel. He accuses Democrats of being anti-Israel, all this stuff. But then Nick Fuentes makes No War with Iran go viral when Elon Musk is interviewing Trump. And Candace Owens she was part of the Daily Wire. She got pushed out of the Daily Wire for being anti-Israel, but she's still out there being Candace Owens. And that it's weird. And I think that among average Trump supporters, not among the Trump, conservatainment, right? Conservatainment is what they call it, right? Ben Shapiro, Fox News, all that stuff. They call it conservatainment. The Daily Wire, all that stuff, right? The Daily Beast, all that, all that stuff is overwhelmingly pro-Israel. But if you read the comments, all right, the people that watch Alex Jones, the people that watch the people that watch the Daily Wire, the people that watch Fox News, a lot of them are very anti-Israel. And maybe not for good reasons, right? They come to anti-Semitic conclusions. They're promoting the whole Judeo-Bolshevism, all that crap. And, there's a lot of differences between me and them, but they're anti-Israel, right? And this is where it's getting weird, right? I don't know if you all noticed this, but a few years ago, it's getting to be it's almost 10 years ago now. It'll be 10 years ago. I wrote a book against Israel that actually a number of my Jewish friends came to me and said, Caleb, this crossed the line, and I took it off the market. And it used to be that people who talked shit against me would bring that up all the time. They would show the cover of my book. Caleb's an anti-Semite. Caleb hates Jews. You'll notice nobody says that anymore. Nobody brings that up. I am called all kinds of nasty names, but nobody ever calls me anti-Semitic nowadays. Very interesting. I'm shocked. I'm surprised. I've apologized for the book and for some of the language I used and all of that. But you'll notice it used to be as soon as you said my name, he's an anti-Semite. He hates Jews. No one ever says that anymore. I made an honest mistake 10 years ago, and I wrote a book that was deeply insensitive. I don't think it was anti-Semitic, but it crossed a line. And I've apologized for it, but you'll notice nobody ever brings it up now. Nobody brings it up. Meanwhile, Candace Owens is out there doing her thing. Nick Fuentes is a big part of the Trump universe doing his thing. The left is out there doing the Free Palestine thing in a very ineffective way, but that's a whole nother conversation. And you'll notice the term anti-Semite, you hate Jews and all of that is out there everywhere. And Israel is being so genocidal and murderous that, a lot of things that used to be completely taboo are tolerated, are suddenly allowed, right? And it's weird how that works, right? It's really, really weird how that works. I'm not going to say names, but there's certain commentators that are in the anti-imperialist universe who said some things in the last couple months that used to be, if you said certain things, that was the end of your career. That was the end of your career. And they've said those things and they just continue. And I don't know. I mean, I'm watching it, and I don't necessarily even agree with some of these things that have been said. And I'm like, how is it okay to say this now? Oh, that's because Israel's committing a genocide, and everybody knows that. And Israel points at anyone who points out what they're doing and says, well, that's anti-Semitism. And it's like people are just like, okay, fuck it, right? And I've noticed that the stigma. It used to be that if you were labeled anti-Semitic, if you were considered to be anti-Israel, you were done. You were done. Not anymore. Not anymore. Not anymore. It's pretty weird, honestly. I'm a little bit perplexed by it. It's a little bit weird. But it used to be that, yeah, if you were anti-Israel, you were done. If you were labeled anti-Semitic, if somebody could link you to somebody who said certain things, or if they could twist your words to make it sound like you said that something, I'm not even going to repeat some of the things, then you were done. And now you're not done anymore. The cat's out of the bag. And so, I mean, the way media discourse is around that issue is changing. That is a reality, and the rise of Trump and all of that is part of this right now, and the Candace Owens stuff and the Nick Fuentes stuff, which honestly, I mean, I'm against Israel, but not the way they are. They see things very differently than I see things. Obviously, I really don't like the way they talk about a lot of things, but regardless, the fact that they're there show that they're allowed to be who they are and talk the way they do. That shows that. It shows that things are changing. And in relation to that particular issue about Israel, things are really, really changing. That's all I got to say. So, all righty. Tiger Owl 199. Thank you. I do appreciate it. I do appreciate your gift. What is your opinion on the critical theory workshop and Gabriel Raquel? Well, I don't know anything about that, but let me pull it up. Critical theory workshop, Gabriel Raquel. I don't know anything about him. I don't know anything about his critical theory workshop, but I'm pulling it up. Gabriel Raquel, Western Marxism, Dominic Lasardo, how it was born, how it died. This is a YouTube channel. Gabriel Raquel, critical theory workshop. Okay, I mean, he's got Vijay Prashad on there, who I'm not a big fan of. I don't know. I'm seeing this, and it looks interesting to me. I'll look into it to some degree or other, but I don't know. I mean, I have some immediate thoughts, but I will hold them. I will hold my tongue before I spout off, because I honestly don't know where these folks are coming from, and I shouldn't just name associate and bait them on the basis of names that I see. I will hold my tongue for the moment, and I will examine this. Right? I have my thoughts about critical theory. I have my thoughts about so-called Western Marxism and the Frankfurt School and how it's a distortion and how it's a big part of the problem that we're seeing right now. I have my frustration with people who just defend it and insist that it can't be wrong because they learned it in college and they had a good experience, so it can't be wrong. And I've argued with people about it. I got kind of heated a little bit with Doug Lane. You'll remember when Peter Coffin and myself and Doug Lane had our exchange about Marxism. At one point, I thought it was a friendly discussion, but I did get a little bit heated with Doug Lane because he was just, he was really holding on to that stuff. And I got a little bit heated with him, and we're still friends. I still look up to Doug Lane. I still think he's a good guy, but it goes to show you that these are complex things. And I really do get frustrated with people who just insist that, that Theodore Adorno shit, Hannah Arendt, all that stuff. I cannot stand that stuff, really. Susan Sontag, Hannah Arendt, all that stuff. That is not Marxism. That is anti-populism. That is anti-working class. That is anti-people. In the name of being anti-fascist and anti-authoritarian, it has absolutely nothing to do with Marxist economics. It spits in the face of everything that R. Palm Dutt wrote about. It disassociates and denounces the Soviet Union and all the miracles that they achieved. And it is the ideology of color revolutions and the ideology of George Soros and the regime change apparatus. So I really have no use for that. And I don't want to pass judgment on these people because maybe these people are criticizing it also, right? Maybe I could learn from their criticism. Maybe they agree with me and they could give me some more nuanced criticism of this stuff. I shouldn't make judgments until I've done my research, right? I should do an investigation. So that's what I'm going to do. I will hold my tongue. I will not give a reaction to just what I see. I will hold my tongue and look into it. Good morning from Denmark. You are fantastic, Caleb. Well, thank you. I'm doing the best that I can. These are weird times. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know I will deal with it, right? I will deal with it, whatever it is. And, things are changing very rapidly. And, and I do know that we're going to have a great workshop in Chicago. And sign up and be there. I need you there. You need to go register for the workshop. Register as soon as you can so we know how much food to order and who's going to be there and everything, right? So there we go. TYT is trash. Cenk Uygur was rude to Candace Owens in their last debate. Literally, that guy has no moral standard. He still believes in the leftist. Yeah, Cenk Uygur is absolutely awful. And the way he's treated Jimmy Dore, and I mean, he's just a Democratic Party shill. And, they will say the truth as long as they won't get in trouble for it. As long as it doesn't harm the Democrat Party, they'll say it. They will say that they'll say what's true a day late and a dollar short when there's no danger involved. And then when someone else says the exact same thing that they say, 3 months before they said it, somebody else said it and got attacked and got destroyed and they were teaming up with the liberals to attack them. And then 3 or 4 months later, when it doesn't matter, when the election is over, they'll say it. Oh yeah, and we saw that with the Young Turks. I liked the Young Turks. I actually listened to them a lot during the early Obama years because they were fun. They had a show every day, and I could listen to it. And YouTube was not what it is now. Social media was a new thing. I would listen to the Young Turks, but the Young Turks have really let me down. They have really disappointed me. Now, folks, you know what? It is late tonight, and I don't see any more super chats. But you know what? I did an audio book of the Houthi book. I read it on various streams, and then we made an audio book of it. And now, if you go to my personal website, calebmaupin.net, or you go to the CPI website, it links to the audio book of the Houthi book that I made. Lately I've had a lot of free time. And I do have a lot of free time, and the night is young, and there's a lot of you watching right now. So normally I would just end the stream right now, but because I got some steam in me, I'm going to start a new book, right? And if you all have more super chats, send them in, keep me talking, right? I'm here to answer your questions. I wrote this book a while back. I published it about 2 years ago because during the Occupy Wall Street years and during the Obama administration, I did a lot of writing. And I wrote a number of articles, and my worldview was changing a lot during those years. I went to Iran for the first time. I went to Venezuela for the first time. I was starting to, and so I wrote many, many articles that were published, during those years. And I don't want them to be lost. I noticed that a lot of them started disappearing from the internet. And I didn't want them to be lost. So I published this book, Capitalism Must Be Destroyed, The Early Writings of Caleb Maupin. It's most of the articles I wrote from 2007 to 2015. And I published them so that they would be preserved. And so I figured that that I would read you this book. And it's a lot. There's a lot of content in here. And it's just many, many articles that I wrote. But I would, on various streams, I would just keep reading from this book. And eventually we'd have an audiobook of Capitalism Must Be Destroyed that you can listen to. And I figure that's something I can do, right? So I'm going to read you probably the introduction tonight of this book. And I'll read it to you bit by bit, and then we'll have the audiobook. So if you have any more super chats, keep them rolling in. I'm going to read you the introduction to Capitalism Must Be Destroyed. Capitalism Must Be Destroyed, the early writings of Caleb Maupin from 2007 to 2015. I'm going to read it to you all, and then I'll answer any more questions, and then we'll call it a night. So there we go. So here we go. This is Capitalism Must Be Destroyed, the early writings of Caleb Maupin, 2007 to 2015. We're going to read some of it. We're going to read it here. For many years, I have intended to publish this volume, but never got around to it. I'm glad to see it finally compiled. The intention is to preserve my work from earlier years. This book is not simply a matter of personal indulgence or vanity. I am publishing it because I think it is important to show those who follow my current work as a social media personality, journalist, and political analyst how I developed. The articles included here will give proper context to what I do now by documenting the political perspective I promoted throughout my 20s. As a teenager, one of my favorite movies was Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, directed by Terence Fisher. The film stars Peter Cushing, and it depicts a mad scientist, Dr. Frankenstein, on the run from the law, in hiding, maneuvering to restart his experiments and reunite with old collaborators. It was due to my love of this film that I set out to use the line "Capitalism must be destroyed" in a speech. I did use this line in 2011 in my presentation to the Workers' World Party National Conference, held amid the Occupy Wall Street protests at Paul Robeson High School in the Bronx. I feel this phrase is also the appropriate title for this nostalgic volume of articles, published at a time when I am taking a short but necessary break from public work and social media interactions. The articles preserved here mostly appeared in Workers' World, the publication of the Workers' World Party, the small Marxist-Leninist sect I was a member of from 2007 to 2015. Some of the articles were published on RT.com or in New Eastern Outlook, the web magazine of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Two much more recently written appendices on my personal history and the rise and fall of the Workers' World Party have been added, and the articles are arranged by topic. The first section, Fight the Cuts, consists of articles I wrote about my experience being unemployed and hungry as a youth in my early 20s, living in the Rust Belt, post-industrial metropolis, the Mistake by the Lake, Cleveland, Ohio. These articles were written in the immediate aftermath of the financial crisis and the election of Barack Obama. At the time, libertarian free market economics was being pushed hard, social programs were being cut, and working families were struggling. During these years, I was coming to understand Marxist economics much more thoroughly by reading William Z. Foster and listening intently to the lectures of Workers' World Party theoretician Fred Goldstein. The section Dissecting War Propaganda includes a number of articles I wrote debunking U.S. media's narrative of international events. During the period when these articles were written, U.S. war propaganda was shifting from neoconservative rhetoric about spreading freedom to more liberal woke narratives of activist NGOs tied to U.S. intelligence. Terrorists and extremists were portrayed as freedom fighters, opposing evil authoritarian regimes. I specifically highlighted the role of Samantha Power and how she drew from Zbigniew Brzezinski and his foreign policy strategies from the late Cold War. The third section, The Socialist World, describes current events involving Venezuela, China, and People's Korea. The articles describe the achievements of socialism and the struggles these countries are facing. The articles point to the unique understanding of socialism and capitalism that I was developing at the time, which ultimately strayed from the orthodoxy of the Workers' World Party and slowly led me to the politics that now are put forward by the Center for Political Innovation. The fourth section, Class Struggle in American History, consists of articles I wrote to serve a specific purpose in the aftermath of the financial crisis and the rise of poverty which followed. Workers' World Party oriented its cadre to educate the population about the history of labor and poor people's movements. All these articles were written with the intention of doing that and pointing toward anniversaries and current trends in order to bring this message home. Among Workers' World Party's ranks, the Communist Party USA of the 1930s was considered to be the shining example, the pinnacle of this kind of organizing, though nostalgia for the 1960s anti-war movement and the Black Panthers also existed. These pieces were intended to make people aware of the potential of banding together to resist economic injustice while putting forward the vision of a whole new society. The fifth section, Occupy Wall Street, consists of articles written during the widespread protest movements of 2011 and their aftermath. These articles are written from the perspective of a participant, someone who was in Zuccotti Park, running through the streets of Manhattan, dodging police batons and mace, getting arrested, and preaching socialism. I was Workers' World Party's primary public visible figure during these protests, and in the aftermath of the American Autumn of 2011, I continued to be identified with the movement. I sat in the courtroom during Cecily McMillan's trial, and it was featured in international media discussing her conviction and imprisonment for involvement in the protests. It was due to my visibility in the Occupy Wall Street protests representing former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark and his International Action Center that my career in international media was launched. The sixth section, Lessons from the Global Class Struggle, consists of articles going over the history of the Soviet Union, the fight against fascism, Romania, the Vietnam War, and the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, among other important moments. Each of the articles was written with the intention of telling something to my audience in the time that they were published. The message of these texts is primarily about the importance of relentless struggle, the deceptive nature of what we are taught about socialism, and the strength we can gather from knowing the history of our own movement. The seventh section, even CIA statistics show, is a short series of articles I wrote for Workers' World newspaper, utilizing the data of the publicly declassified version of the CIA World Factbook that can be found online in order to make political points. The eighth section consists of transcribed or abridged speeches that I gave at Workers' World Party national conferences or forums. Readers should be prepared for an endless amount of homage to WWP's deceased charismatic leader, Sam Marcy. Workers' World Party was always a bit of a cult of personality and never developed formal bylaws or a constitution, functioning as a kind of bubble of activists centered around him. Many articles reference his concept of the global class war or global class war theory, as Workers' World Party members refer to it. I never met Sam Marcy. He died in 1998 when I was still a child. But being a member of the organization he dedicated his life to building and directing certainly led to him having significant impact on me. Since my departure from Workers' World Party, I have come to ultimately reject a number of aspects of Sam Marcy's teachings, though I agree with the overall thrust of his message. I am still a communist, a thorough anti-imperialist, and a believer in class struggle, and dedicated to building communities of solidarity where working class people can pull together to find support and learn ideology. As appendices, I have included 2 articles clarifying my position with regards to Sam Marcy and the multiple organizations claiming his legacy, and describing my experience and departure from Workers' World Party. The first appendix, the first appendix, note on the political development of the author, was originally included as a kind of addendum to the book Bread Tube Serves Imperialism. The piece explains my personal journey from growing up in a small conservative town to joining a Maoist sect, to eventually joining Workers' World Party, to breaking with Workers' World Party and founding the Center for Political Innovation. The second appendix, The Masses Are the Water, Understanding the Failures of Late Marxism, gives a thorough ideological assessment of Marcy's failures and contributions, and the piece also critiques the movementism of leftist groups that claim his legacy, and explains why I have broken with the main currents of what calls itself the left, and why I raised the slogan out of the movement to the masses. Readers may be disappointed by the repetitiveness of the articles, being hammered with themes such as workers versus bosses and global class war being hammered home over and over. Readers familiar with my more recent work may also be somewhat disappointed by the lack of analytical depth. This reflects the organization that I was in at the time and my own level of development at the time. One of the most common criticisms of Workers' World Party is that it maintains a kind of simplistic understanding of politics, along with a kind of rah-rah political atmosphere reminiscent of high school pep rallies. Critics have labeled them the cheerleaders of the left for their anti-intellectualism, their simplistic sloganeering, and their cliquish internal atmosphere. This criticism is certainly fair, but it is the result of efforts to hold a hardline communist group together amid years of setbacks and confusion following the fall of the Soviet Union. Despite whatever criticisms I have of Sam Marcy and his ideological errors, they were doing the best they could. They held a community of people together amid historic defeats. They opposed wars, they preached Marxism, they held on to Marxist economics amid the wave of new left confusion. Despite the low intellectual level of Workers' World Party's internal atmosphere throughout my time in the organization, I continued learning. My understanding of historical materialism, economics, psychology, psychoanalysis, and philosophy is certainly much richer than it was at the time these articles were published. Regardless of how they may feel about me now and what I do, I am deeply indebted to people like Bill D., Allison L., and others who pressed me to dig deeper and reach a higher plane of understanding that has increased the quality of my work in the last 10 years. I owe a particular debt of gratitude to the Schiller Institute and Daniel Burke for their education and engagement with me despite my departure since my departure from Workers' World Party, regardless of our differences in overall perspective. This book is being published in order to preserve these writings and make sure that regardless of what websites go up or are taken down, these pieces remain accessible to those who may want to frame similar arguments, learn from their content, or better understand the period of time in which they were published. I hope you enjoy reading them, and I hope it helps put my current work into better context. That's the introduction to Capitalism Must Be Destroyed. So this book is out there, and I'll continue reading it on these streams. We'll just go through it, and eventually, when I've read the entire thing, we'll have it as an audiobook, and you can listen to the entire thing from beginning to end. I do want to thank the person who sent in, McLott. Thank you for that great super chat. I do appreciate it. And I will keep going, no matter what happens. That's one thing that I have learned, to have confidence in myself. No matter what, I land on my feet. I never surrender. I never give up. And, I don't know what tomorrow will bring or what the next day will bring or what the next day will bring, but I'm relentless and I'm dedicated. And we dare to struggle and we dare to win. So on that note, folks, I will end the stream here. I don't see any more super chats that have come in. We'll continue reading that book on future streams. I'll be back tomorrow night. Don't know why I won't be. If things in my life do take a dramatic turn, if I end up relocating from New York, which is a possibility at this time, I'll just be honest with you. There's a chance that I may not be living in the current area that I live in. I don't know what's going to happen. But when my situation becomes clear, I will let you all know about it in a very clear and professional way. And, we'll adjust accordingly. But I'm going to keep streaming. I'll just tell you that much. I will keep streaming. So on that note, I will put on the closing music, and I'll see you tomorrow. I will see you tomorrow night. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.